Hello and welcome to another video with Gardening for Beginners. This is the second installment of our series on growing peppers from seed to harvest. If you haven't yet and are just getting started with the seeds, watch our first video titled PEPP 1301, and I get into why it's called that in that video, where I show you how to start your seeds using the paper towel method. It's really convenient, fast, and much easier and more reliable than starting your seeds directly into the soil. But if you've been following me since that other video, or you've started your pepper seeds on your own and the seedlings that have sprouted are about 2 to 4 weeks old, this video that you're watching right now is the one that you should be watching. We're going to talk about the different fertilizing regimens I use, how to prepare them for the outdoors, when to transplant, and the different planting options that you're going to have. What started out as a small seed is starting to develop into something that's going to become a peppery bounty, and depending upon how hot the peppers are, a source of abusive entertainment. So what do you say? Let's keep this pepper journey rolling. Okay, before we get started, I did want to congratulate one of our Facebook admins, Julie Davis, for winning a spot in Burpee's 2019 Gardeners of the Year. She'll be representing them in the month of November 2019. Now, coincidentally, I also won and will be representing March 2019. I guess they just let anybody in, right? But kidding aside, Julie, you deserve it. You and your husband have an outstanding pepper garden, and congratulations. It was well earned, and I cannot wait to see all the wonderful things that you bring us in November. Congratulations. You want to start providing your peppers with some sort of fertilizer once they get what is called their true leaves, which is their second set of leaves. This one, you can clearly see the first set of leaves right here, and then you can see the true leaves, which is the second set, start to sprout right there. So I go with a water-soluble fertilizer, and I've experimented with different types and found that a balanced fertilizer, at least at this point in their growth, is the one that works best. You'll see 3 different numbers on these, and that is what is called the NPK breakdown, which is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. This one is a 242, and that's great. I also have here a 511 fish fertilizer and a 612-6 fertilizer. So when it comes to the fish fertilizer, I really don't like using that when I'm indoors. It can get on a little bit on the stinky side for a few minutes, but I love using this outdoors. It's a great product. I've heard other people give really good feedback on that as well. When it comes to the 612-6, at minimum, at this point, you want to use it as a half strength or a quarter strength and adjust if needed. I use a quarter strength because I fertilize once a week. Most instructions say to fertilize once every 2 weeks, but with my seedlings, first I cut it to half strength because that's typically what you want to do because they're so young. They really don't need that much food anyway. And then I cut it in half again so that I can fertilize weekly. I do this because it's easier for me to keep track of feeding my plants, since I'm basically feeding all of them every week regardless of how old they are. I do a lot of succession planting, which means starting seeds in 2 to 4 week intervals, so it just makes feeding them easier to do them all at the same time every week, which for me is typically Thursday. Follow the directions on the bottle, and if you're doing like me, cut the measurement down to 25%. So if the bottle calls for 1 tablespoon per gallon of water, then you'd only use 3/4 of a teaspoon. That's just an example. You probably won't have enough seedlings to use an entire gallon of water, and it doesn't need to be exact, so you can either make a smaller batch or even guesstimate with a cup of water and a medicine dropper like I have here, and then monitor your seedlings to make sure they aren't getting under or overfed. As you can see, this is heavily diluted with water. I did not put a lot of plant food in here because at this stage of the game they really don't need that much. I can't bottom water because I don't typically use seed starting trays, so I use a cup like this just to pour the fertilizer in and just enough to give them a little drink. Like that right there, for example, it's really all they're gonna need. I do this in the morning before I turn my grow lights on, or in the evening after I turn them off. Some fertilizers can burn your plants with the addition of light. Most of the stuff I use is organic and is guaranteed not to burn, but better safe than sorry. So you've got your feeding regimen down, and as the weeks progress, you'll want to start to take measures to prepare your seedlings for the outdoors. There's one thing that you definitely need to do, and there are two other things that you want to consider doing if you have the time and resources. At least a week prior, but preferably longer, to transplanting your seeds outdoors, you need to harden them off. Simply put, it's getting them to adjust to the environment outdoors. Starting your seeds indoors is a great way to get your seedlings off to a strong start because you can control the environment indoors in ways that you definitely cannot outdoors. But that comes with a price. These seedlings aren't used to the stronger rays that are put out by the sun. They need to acclimate to the sun and more than likely to the drier air outside as well. So to help your seedlings harden off, put them outdoors for an hour or two the first day, 2 or more hours the next day, and so on. Start them off in a shady spot, then gradually move them to a spot that gets more sun. I've done it in as little as 3 days, but you're going to get better results when you give it closer to a week or so. Don't get cheap with your peppers, or really any veggies that you harden off, because if they aren't properly acclimated, they'll go into shock or wilt when you transplant them, and quite possibly die. Hopefully I've terrified you enough into understanding how important it is to harden your plants off. So what are the other two measures that I had mentioned earlier? Another thing you can do, and this is optional, but it's something you would start doing a few weeks before you start hardening your plants off, is putting a small oscillating fan near your seedlings. This light breeze will cause them to slightly sway and will help to strengthen their stalks. You want to try and mimic a light breeze that they would normally experience outside, so don't have the fan pointed directly at them because that can cause problems as well. And this doesn't need to be for a constant 24 hours. Maybe start with an hour or two when you're home and gradually increase the length of time that it's running. Just monitor your seedlings and over time increase the length of time it's on as you see that it isn't causing them to permanently bend. Remember, you just want the wind to kind of kiss the seedlings, not bear hug them. The second thing to consider, and this really just applies to peppers and not other veggies, is something called cold treating them. When the seedlings get their third true leaf, and remember we talked about that at the beginning of the video, you've got your first set of leaves and then you've got your true leaves that pop up. So when they get their third true leaf, place them in an area during the day with a temperature of about 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Do this for 4 weeks. This does two things. The cold slows growth, which sounds like a bad thing, but in slowing the growth, it also allows the plant to focus its energy on developing stronger cell walls and producing higher levels of carbohydrates to store away. Now, why is that important? More carbohydrates means more flowers and thus more fruit. After 4 weeks, bring them back indoors until it's time to transplant them outside. One thing to keep in mind, because their growth will be slowed a bit, expect a 2-week delay in transplanting them outside. So if you haven't started your seeds yet, start them 2 weeks earlier, and if you already have, consider this delay before deciding whether to do a cold treatment or not. You could always top them instead, which is pinching the top growing tip of the plant off once the plant has side shoots. This will cause the plant to grow bushier instead of just straight up. I'll show you that process in a future video. I do want to stress these two things that I mentioned after hardening your plants, they are strictly optional. If you have time and the resources to experiment with them, by all means do that, but I don't want you to think it's a requirement to get an outstanding harvest. So when do we transplant? This is where art and science kind of collide. You definitely want to plant after your last predicted frost date, which for me in zone 9A is March 9th. I use that as a yardstick, and then you also want to use either a weather app or weather.com to get as long of a forecast as you can, definitely at least a 10-day forecast. With that info in hand, you should have a pretty good idea on the weather and your peppers' survivability outside. You really don't want your peppers to be in temperatures below 65 degrees Fahrenheit. That's when potential damage, shock, or stunting can occur. Will it be okay if it drops to 60 degrees for a short period of time? I mean, probably, but keep in mind, even a light frost will destroy these plants. Early on, if you plant them during a time where temperatures in your area could potentially fluctuate, just keep an eye on it and be prepared to protect them if need be. I get to cheat a little bit, as you can see, because I have a greenhouse that I can stash them in early on to mitigate any potential weather fluctuations, but not everybody has that luxury. So the last thing you'll want to consider is how you're going to transplant them outdoors. I bring this up now because you don't want to wait until the last minute. But the good news is we've got plenty of time to weigh our options. You don't have to decide right now. So the easiest option is to plop it right in the ground. We'll get more into this process in a future video, but the thing you'll want to consider now is the type of soil that you have in the ground, as well as the amount of light that you're getting in this spot. So when it comes to light, I know it doesn't look like this area is getting a lot of light. That being said, when March, April, May rolls around, this area gets a lot of sun. Just something I've observed over the years. So that, I'm not too worried about it. But the thing that does concern me is my soil. My soil is pretty heavy with clay. I've been amending my soil over the years with compost and small amounts of peat moss in hopes of softening it up. I haven't developed this spot a lot, and you can see by how heavy and thick the soil is. So if I were to plant a pepper right here, I'd want to dig a fairly big hole, mix in compost and peat moss, and then along with whatever other amendments like plant food to the soil that I'd be doing. Now this spot over here is where I'm either going to be doing some peppers or all of my tomatoes. I haven't decided yet. This patch of land was part of our video on trench composting, you might remember. So I've already got a lot of compostable material that's been breaking down, getting eaten by worms, and converted to compost and worm castings. So when the time comes to transplant, it should have a good nutritional balance of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and calcium. We'll see what I decide to plant here. Like I said before, we've got time, but not so much time where we shouldn't be strategizing now. The next option is a raised bed. Raised beds are nice because they offer one major thing that just transplanting into the ground doesn't: major control over the makeup of the soil. You can add quite a few inches or feet of soil in here, so you don't have to worry as much about the makeup of the soil below. That being said, you still need to worry about how much sun this spot gets. I already have other plans for this spot. This is my fall and winter garden area, kind of winding down this section of my yard. So please forgive the fact that I haven't been weeding it. I really am just this guy is towards the end of its life cycle. But the plans that I have, I'm going to have some climbing vegetables on here, and I'm also strongly considering this area for growing the three sisters, which is corn, squash, and green beans. It sounds like a neat little project, and especially for a future video. The last option is to use some form of container, and with this option you have a lot of different choices. At minimum, at least for peppers, you want a 3-gallon container. They don't require the 5-gallon containers that things like cucumbers and tomatoes definitely need. You can purchase 5-gallon pickle buckets for as little as $2. But what I've seen really good results with are these 5-gallon fabric containers, okay? These pots are just wonderful. I don't know if it's the better airflow or the good drainers or the good drainage, you know, from these containers, but whatever it is, it seems to give me the best growth out of my veggies and higher yields compared to other containers. Of course, it doesn't get better than planting your veggies directly into the ground because they've got complete freedom and better access, easier access to nutrients. That being said, this is a close second right here because if you don't have, you know, the space, for example, to plant in ground, this is definitely something that you should consider. That should give you all the info you need to keep your peppers healthy as they grow indoors, as well as get some planning started on how you're going to prepare them for the outside and eventually transplant them. Now, I've got one more order of gardening business to attend to before we close out and cue up the music. But before I get to that, if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and the subscribe button and set it up to receive notifications when future videos come out. So this last thing I wanted to talk about has to do with this pepper plant right here. You may remember my video on starting seeds indoors way back in August of 2018. Well, this plant is one of the seeds that I started indoors when I filmed that video, and she's been inside this whole time. I wanted to see how big I could get her with LEDs, but by the time she got big enough to transplant outdoors, it was way too cold outside. She's not looking too good right now, as you can see, but I want to try something. I'm gonna trim her down a little bit, see if she bounces back. If she does, it'll be just in time for spring. I've heard if you trim them back, even this small, they'll bush out. Ugh. Wish me luck though. Thank you for watching and happy gardening.